Let's look at how digital systems are currently generating precise, high-speed data that tells us who we are. This goes beyond algorithms predicting consumer behavior. We are actively outsourcing the construction of our own identities to external systems, systems that possess zero stake in our actual psychological stability. This diagram illustrates the foundation state. It is the baseline operating system of human psychology, where a central subject is constantly bombarded by external inputs. Notice how the subject morphs to match incoming data. Circumstances define reality faster than awareness can step in. With artificial intelligence, data volume and velocity multiply, locking identity in a reactive loop. The subject vibrates erratically under the dense input. As long as an individual relies on processing external data to build a sense of self, they are playing entirely on the algorithm's home turf. Structural collapse in this scenario is a mathematical certainty. The standard defense against this technological pressure is usually an appeal to human intellect. The assumption is that our capacity for advanced reasoning, complex problem-solving, or creativity will protect us. Cognitive processing offers no protection here. Every artificial intelligence architecture in existence is built to master the exact subject-object information loop that our intellect relies on. The actual, non-replicable human trait is identity location. It is the capacity for consciousness to operate entirely prior to the subject-object structure of thought. We have hard physiological data that measures exactly what this looks like. We can now separate temporary mental states like mindfulness from a permanent structural relocation of human identity. Redefining consciousness is a required biological and structural adaptation for surviving an environment defined by artificial intelligence abundance. Recent neuroscience research examining contemplative practices draws a sharp line between stress reduction and actual developmental identity change. This model visualizes their core finding, detached self-observation. A subject node begins rigidly merged with an experience node. Through practice, awareness watches the experience rather than being captured by it, pulling away until a clean gap of observation exists between the two. The researchers highlight a critical difference between momentary coherence, using a meditative tool temporarily, and long-term developmental regulation. Notice how the gap solidifies. This represents a permanent shift in how the mind operates. This structural shift maps exactly to what we call the witness state. It is the first physical relocation of identity, moving awareness out of the automatic reaction loop. Clinical psychology literature often risks conflating the tool used to achieve this separation with the permanent identity shift itself. Achieving the witness state provides physical proof that identity is not permanently fused to cognition. It is mobile. It can be decoupled entirely from the endless data loops that algorithms dominate. To see how far this decoupling can go, we look at deconstructive meditative practices. These methods do not refine attention, they systematically dismantle self-referential mental structures. The difficulty, historically, has been measuring awareness without relying on subjective self-reporting or standard cognitive tests, both of which require the subject to process information. This diagram shows the solution researchers found: startle reflex modulation. The top track illustrates standard cognitive processing, where a signal navigates dense neural nodes. The bottom track maps the startle reflex, a physiological response that fires instantly, entirely bypassing conscious thought and belief. The study measured individuals trained in non-dual awareness and found a definitive alteration in the startle reflex. The physiological reaction flattens and dissipates, creating a structurally different relationship with incoming sudden stimuli. This maps directly to the source state. It marks an identity location where awareness operates completely prior to the subject-object structure of ordinary experience. Because we are looking at a physiological change that bypasses cognition entirely, this phenomenon belongs in a completely separate category from standard mindfulness or behavioral therapy. If awareness produces measurable physiological changes strictly outside of cognitive processing, then awareness operates on a substrate entirely independent of information processing. We must compare this biological reality to the internal mechanics of a large language model or an algorithmic neural network. This wireframe represents AI architecture. Regardless of the parameter count or the compute power involved, every system operates on an infinite, high-speed loop, cycling between a processor and a piece of data, an observer evaluating an object. Artificial intelligence can perfectly simulate the foundation state, and it easily mimics human cognitive intelligence, specifically because both biological cognition and machine learning rely on this exact subject-object processing loop. But observe what happens when we map the physiological evidence of the source state. The glowing node represents awareness, located prior to the subject-object structure. It exists entirely disconnected from the internal loop. A system structurally confined to subject-object processing cannot, mathematically or architecturally, replicate a state that transcends that exact structure. This establishes the exact perimeter of uniquely human consciousness. The boundary is not found in what we calculate, but in where we locate our awareness. The immediate structural question is functional. If you decouple identity from cognition and experience, do you simply become a passive, non-functional blank slate? Researchers addressed this by analyzing individuals described as awakened using the Buddhist 5 aggregates model, applying it strictly as a framework of structural psychology, not religious dogma. This visualization demonstrates their findings. Identity persists as a dynamic, non-reified process. A rigid, fixed self-concept shatters and reorganizes into a fluid, highly dynamic constellation of particles. It holds a cohesive shape and continues to function without needing to defend a static core. This structural configuration mirrors the integrated state. It is an identity location where awareness engages fully with incoming experience, but no longer needs to actively reconstruct its identity out of that experience. The data shows measurable functional differences in this state. Individuals demonstrate vastly superior decision-making and high resilience when subjected to conditions of extreme disruption and uncertainty. An identity structure that does not need to constantly defend a fixed self-concept is functionally immune to the massive external data manipulation of the algorithmic self. We can now assemble these isolated physiological findings into a single, unified model of human consciousness development. This topological map charts the complete progression. The outermost ring is the foundation state. Moving inward, we locate the witness state, the source, the heart, and finally, a glowing central core representing the integrated state. Each inward shift on this map demands a specific physiological and structural relocation of awareness. With each step, identity moves further away from algorithmic influence. High-speed, chaotic data points bombard the vulnerable outer foundation ring, causing heavy distortion. But as the energy travels inward, it strikes the stabilized awareness layers and dissipates long before reaching the integrated core. This topological framework provides a literal architectural blueprint for human survival in an environment where external reality is overwhelmingly synthetic. Artificial intelligence is aggressively externalizing the cognitive and identity formation processes that used to require a human mind. Moving through the witness, source, and integrated states can no longer be categorized as a contemplative hobby or a clinical therapy outcome. It is now a highly urgent, strictly practical structural response to the environmental conditions generated by AI abundance. Cognitive processing has been outsourced. The ability to structurally relocate and stabilize awareness independent of experience is the last irreducibly human skill.